Good morning, everyone. I'm Martha Zavala, president of the League of Women Voters, Pasadena area. Welcome to Thursday with the League, Refuge 101. Before we get to our program, let's take a moment to acknowledge National Women's History Month and celebrate the many contributions women have made to enrich our personal and public lives. Stephanie Doubt, our State League Executive Director, says it best. The accomplishments of women throughout history have advanced every part of society, from voting rights to civil rights, science, government, athletics, healthcare access, business leadership, caregiving, and more. Still, it's difficult to celebrate at this moment as people, including women in the Ukraine, are taking up arms to defend their country, their homes, their land. We hope that the ferocious assault on Ukraine ends soon. Thousands have already lost their lives in this attack on democracy. Let's honor their sacrifices here at home. It's doubly important that we shore up our own democracy by continuing to push for federal legislation to secure voting rights for all Americans. We have the information on our website. Please visit and see what you can do. When today's event was planned, we did not realize that Europe would once again have to contend with a staggering number of refugees. We are very eager to present this timely, relevant, and important program on current developments in refugee and immigrant rights. It's one of the goals our president identified, again, in the State of the Union earlier this week. Congress and our state legislature must take immediate action to pass common sense, fair immigration and refugee policies to end the crisis at our border and the separation of families and provide a path to citizenship. Our speaker today, Carly Booz, will speak to us about the fight for refugee rights. You will learn more about Carly and her work in a few minutes when our immigration committee member introduces her. After Carly's presentation, she's going to spend about 15 minutes with us taking questions from attendees. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. Our moderator will present the questions to Carly for her response. Questions may be edited for brevity and to avoid duplicates. We may not have time to include all the questions, and if we don't get to yours, please send it separately by email to events@lwv-pa.org or immigration@lwv-pa.org, and we'll try to get you an answer. Please do not enter your question or any comments in the chat box, as that is used by the webinar staff to keep things running smoothly. If you have concerns about sound or anything else, you can type them into the Q&A section and someone will try to help you out. After the Q&A, our immigration committee will offer you the opportunity to take action to support pending legislation. Then I will announce some upcoming events of interest and close the meeting. We're grateful to have Pasadena Media. They are recording this event and we will post it to our YouTube channel in a few days for viewing. And now let me turn the meeting over to Mary Ann Lutz of the Immigration Committee. She'll say a few words about the committee and then introduce our speaker, Carly Booz. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you so much, Martha. This is a very exciting morning for us, and we're very happy to welcome our speaker this morning. Her name is Carly Booz. She is the Communication Relations Manager at the International Rescue Committee in Los Angeles, where she's worked for the past 3 years. Before that, she was the project coordinator for 4 years at the Program for Torture Victims, which is an organization which serves survivors of torture seeking asylum. Carly graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder with a BA in International Affairs and also studied at the American University in Cairo at the Arabic Language Institute. She's passionate about human rights, migration issues, and refugee settlement and resettlement. And she loves to foster kittens on the side. With that, I'd like to welcome Carly Bowes.
Hi, Marianne and Martha. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I'm so excited to be with you all here today. Obviously, this cannot come at a greater time or a more timely time in history. So I'm very excited to speak with you all today and share with you a little bit about refugee resettlement and what that process looks like here in the US. And then how you can get involved and how you can support that process and welcome refugees into your own community. And then I'll also share with you today some calls to action that we have at the IRC as well for the Ukraine crisis, as well as Afghanistan. So with that being said, I do have a little presentation here today, and there will be time for Q&A at the end. So you can go ahead and, I think as mentioned, ask questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end. But again, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, especially since it's Women's History Month, and share with you all the important work that we're doing at the IRC. So with that being said, sharing my screen. And so as I mentioned, my name is Carly. I'm the Community Relations Manager at the International Rescue Committee in Los Angeles. And today I'm going to go over a little bit about the IRC and the work we do, as well as refugee resettlement and what that work looks like, and then how to get involved. So the mission of the IRC is to help people whose lives and livelihoods have been shattered or uprooted by conflict and disaster to survive, recover, and regain control of their future. So the IRC was actually founded in 1942 by Albert Einstein, and some of you may have a good idea about why Albert Einstein would found the International Rescue Committee, and that is because he was a Jewish refugee himself, fleeing Nazi Germany. And him and other prominent individuals in the US, including Eleanor Roosevelt, created what was then the International Rescue Committee to help other persecuted individuals flee Nazi Germany and then later Nazi occupied France as well. So they helped issue fake passports and fake visas to help people get out of the country. And it was kind of like an underground railroad to get to the US. So since then, the IRC has been providing emergency relief and protection for refugees and helping to rebuild the lives of individuals who have been affected by crises or natural disaster or climate change. So we were the first humanitarian aid organization on the ground in post-war Europe, but now we are active in over 40 countries around the world and over 25 US cities, providing refugee resettlement services as well as other immigration-related services. So our work internationally is a little bit different than in the US. So internationally, we provide emergency relief and response, as well as refugee assistance and protection. So we have programs for women and girls protection and empowerment. We have sanitation and hygiene. We also have direct cash assistance, economic empowerment or livelihood assistance, so assistance with employment in their communities, and a number of other programs that are really focused on that emergency relief and refugee protection. We respond to conflicts and also natural disasters, and we will be in those countries for as long as we are needed. And we really try to work with local organizations and civil society groups and actors so that we really work with the local community to meet their needs. And we are not just coming in as an outsider. We really try to work to fill the gaps and meet the needs of the local community by working with the community to do so. And then in the US, we are in over 25 US cities where we provide mainly refugee resettlement services. So that's kind of like our bread and butter is our refugee resettlement, but we have a number of other programs that are for other refugee, asylee, asylum-seeking, or immigrant populations. It really depends on what the need of the community is. So for example, in Southern California, Arizona, and Florida, we have a program for unaccompanied children. In Colorado, we have a program for survivors of torture. Arizona and other cities, we have programs for survivors of human trafficking. So each office is a little different, but they're really kind of geared to meet the needs of that local community. We also have immigration services, so assisting individuals with applying for their green cards, our citizenship applications, and then we also have educational programs such as ESL, financial coaching and literacy, as well as citizenship classes. But our main core services are those refugee resettlement, and we do provide those services in every office that we're in the US. So this may be redundant information for those of you who are familiar with refugees, but just to kind of help provide a foundation for some of these concepts about who we serve. So a refugee is someone who has been forced to flee their home country and cannot return because of a well-founded fear of persecution based on these 5 grounds of race, religion, nationality, political activity, membership in a certain social group, which can include LGBTQ, or also under the Obama administration, this also came to include asylum seekers who were fleeing domestic violence. And because women were seen as a certain social group that were not provided protection in their home countries. So an asylum seeker, the main difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee is largely technical. So it's about how they gain their status. So a refugee is outside their home country and cannot return, and they are usually given refugee status by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And then asylum seekers, they're essentially, their status is determined in the country of refuge. So for the United States, asylum seekers will be given that status once they reach the US. And so asylum seekers must also prove that they cannot return to their home country because of a legitimate fear of persecution based on those 5 grounds. And they must do so in immigration court. So it's a largely legal process. And it's a very long and complex process as well. For asylum seekers, without an attorney, the rates for approval is very low. It's 5%. So really having an attorney for asylum is essential in the US, unfortunately. And then once asylum seekers are granted their refugee status, they are then called asylees, and they are eligible for the same benefits as refugees in the United States. So they have the same pathways to citizenship. They are eligible for the same public benefits as well. But often this process can take many years. Sometimes I've worked with asylum seekers who have been waiting up to 10 years, unfortunately. And then we have special immigrant visa holders. So these are SIVs. And so you may have heard a lot about SIVs in the past several months because of the evacuation from Afghanistan. So SIV holders are individuals who have worked with or on behalf of the US government in Iraq or Afghanistan. And they have basically they've been given special designated status or a special visa to come to the US. And once they are in the US, they do have the same benefits available as refugees, but they do not necessarily come through the same pathway as refugees who are coming through the refugee admissions program. So crisis watch and why are people fleeing? Now, obviously, this is always evolving as we have the current crisis in Ukraine showing, which I will get to in a little bit here. But for the past few years, here are the main crises we've been observing and the main populations we've been working with. So if you remember a few years ago, there was the ethnic cleansing in Myanmar of Rohingya. This is minority Muslim population in Myanmar, and a record number of 1.7 million people were forced to flee. And their top countries of refuge were or are Bangladesh, India, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, and Indonesia, but a large majority are in Bangladesh. And the IRC is currently working in Bangladesh to help provide services to Rohingya refugees. But a small number have also been resettled here to the US. And now we also, of course, have Syria, where there has been an ongoing conflict since for over a decade now. Nearly 14 million people have been displaced by the conflict. And top countries of refuge have been Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt, although Germany has taken in a significant number of Syrian refugees as well. And then, of course, Afghanistan. And this slide doesn't reflect, or this information here doesn't reflect the evacuation from Afghanistan and the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. But at the time this was created, there were nearly 9 million people displaced by the conflict, and top countries of refuge are Iran and Pakistan, which is still true to this day, although the United States did take in at least 90,000 Afghan refugees who were evacuated this August and September. And then the other country I want to mention is Democratic Republic of Congo. There has been an ongoing crisis there since the 90s, with nearly 5 million people displaced, and a majority of refugees are in Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Burundi. And IRC is also in Uganda assisting Congolese refugees, and a number have been resettled to the US here as well. So of course, then we have the urgent crisis in Ukraine right now. So just kind of a brief update in the latest numbers we have. We now know that 1 million refugees have fled Ukraine since the start of the conflict. And that does not include internally displaced Ukrainians. I believe this is 1 million refugees who have crossed the border and who have fled the country. We know that civilians and their homes are being targeted, and this is, of course, in breach of international humanitarian law. In addition to that, we're also very concerned about reports of discriminatory treatment of people fleeing Ukraine who have been told they either cannot get on the bus or cannot cross the border or must get to the end of the line. All people fleeing Ukraine must be able to leave safely, regardless of nationality, ethnicity, or religion. So just a little bit about how the IRC is responding. We are mobilizing on the ground in Poland and also working with groups in Ukraine to help provide immediate emergency relief and humanitarian support to refugees and those who have been displaced by the conflict. We know that many will be without food and other basic necessities in the coming days. We are rapidly mobilizing to provide this support. So with that being said, I want to quickly go into here kind of what the process looks like then for refugees once they've been given refugee status and how they get to the US or their third country of resettlement. So once a refugee has been registered by the UNHCR, they have 3 options. Or I guess the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has 3 options that they consider to be durable solutions for refugees. So the first is voluntary repatriation, and this means that refugees return to their home country once it is safe to do so. When this was created, conflicts on average were lasting 3 to 5 years. But as we've seen, and as you saw from the previous slide, conflicts are now lasting around 20 years, or if not more. And so refugees on average are spending 17 years in a refugee camp, and that's an entire childhood for some. And refugee camps are not designed to be long-term. And so more and more voluntary repatriation is not a viable solution. So we have the two other options, which are local integration and third country resettlement. So local integration means that local communities are able to integrate refugees into their economies and provide pathways to permanent status. So as you also saw from the previous slides, which is really important to note, that a majority of refugees are hosted in neighboring countries. So majority of Rohingya refugees are hosted in Bangladesh. Majority of Syrian refugees have been hosted in Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan. And then majority of refugees from Afghanistan are in Iran and Pakistan. And a majority of refugees from the DRC are in Uganda. And a majority of refugees from Ukraine will be hosted in neighboring European countries such as Poland and Hungary. But many of these countries, especially, for example, say from the Syrian crisis, Lebanon, which is, a much smaller country economically and geographically, do not have the capacity to support such large numbers of refugees as compared to a country such as the US, which is why we have third country resettlement. So this is a program which 30 plus countries participate in. The US has been a leader in the refugee resettlement program for decades. But there are a number of other countries in Europe as well as South America and Australia and New Zealand who participate as well. So this is the third option, and it is really only considered for the most vulnerable populations because it is only less than 1% of refugees each year who are given the opportunity for third country resettlement. So this is a tiny number. So of the over 30 million refugees worldwide, less than 1% are given the option for third country resettlement each year. So as I mentioned, the US has historically been a leader in refugee resettlement. On average, since the program was codified in 1980, the US has historically resettled around 100,000 refugees per year. This has enjoyed bipartisan support from Democrats, Republicans, and it has really been something that has been a legacy of the United States. Of course, this changed drastically under the previous presidential administration. So we saw refugee admissions being slashed to historic lows under the Trump administration. The outgoing Obama administration had set the refugee admission levels to 110,000, and they were eventually reduced down to 13,000, I believe. And then we thankfully now have seen a restoration of refugee admissions coming back to previous levels. The Biden administration has committed to welcoming 125,000 refugees this year, and we are well on our way to meet that. So that is great news for refugees and those who have been waiting years to be reunited with loved ones or come to the United States. And now I will also mention that in addition to refugee admission levels being greatly reduced, we also saw a significant change in where refugees were coming from for the past 5 years. So due to the travel ban, we saw a significant reduction in Muslim refugees being allowed into the country, even though there was a great need for resettlement and for protection for these populations. So Myanmar and Rohingya refugees, Somalian refugees, Syrian refugees, those from Iraq, or the DRC who are, but refugees from Muslim majority countries were not allowed into the country due to the travel ban. So we saw a shift in demographics of where refugees were coming from. Historically, they should be admitted based on need and not specific regions or religions. So once a refugee is selected for third country resettlement, there is a process then for how they get to the United States. So once the UNHCR designates a refugee or family for third country resettlement, they then are referred to the US, where they have to go through a number of different background checks. There are 8 different federal government agencies, 6 different security databases, 5 separate background checks, 3 different in-person interviews, more security checks, and this all on average takes at least 2 years before approval. So refugees are actually the most vetted individuals to enter the United States. And then once they have been approved, they are referred to one of 9 national resettlement agencies, of which the IRC is one. But there are other organizations which also do resettlement, including Catholic Charities, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, HIAS, World Relief. These are just a number of different agencies that also do resettlement work. The IRC is in addition to, the numbers being reduced, and just kind of also explain how the landscape has changed, at least in Southern California. So all 9 resettlement agencies used to be present in Southern California, but due to the previous administration and the reduction in arrivals coming to the US and therefore funding, there are only 3 resettlement agencies left in Los Angeles. Up until a few weeks ago, a few months ago, we have had the great news that 2 more resettlement agencies have opened their doors here in Southern California. So we're very excited to see this program growing once again. So I won't go too much more into this, but again, this is how refugees arrive to the United States. Again, it's a very lengthy process. But once they arrive, then the resettlement agencies take over with services. And just a little bit here about refugees in California. When our office opened, we were primarily assisting refugees from Vietnam, and then later refugees from the former Soviet Union and the former Yugoslavia, and then primarily refugees from Iran, and then later Afghanistan, which is where a majority of our refugees are from today, but also a significant number are from Central America, including those in our unaccompanied minors program, as well as other countries such as Ukraine and Syria and Iraq as well. So the IRC provides a number of different services for refugees once they arrive. So that is everything from pre-arrival logistics, airport pickup. We work to secure long-term housing, enroll children in school, enroll families in public benefits and Social Security, and then also enrolling families in Medi-Cal and WIC, which is a program for women who are pregnant or recently have had children, health screenings and immunizations, as well as other ongoing medical case management. And then we have our economic empowerment program, which is geared towards financial literacy. We have a microloan program to help individuals build credit, because refugees arrive without credit, and we know how important that is. And then also job readiness and training. And then in addition to that, we also have ongoing family reunification programs, and a number of other family stabilization, psychosocial support, and integration services, including some mental health resources, psychosocial support, and other acculturation classes such as ESL or citizenship classes as well. So the goal of resettlement is really long-term, but the first 90 days is really based around basic needs and urgent needs. It's really that survival period. So we focus on personal safety, immediate basic needs, pressing health issues, short-term financial support, as well as other services. Now, resettlement agencies are only funded to provide services for the first 90 days. And we know that resettlement or integrating into a community takes much longer than that. So we have other programs to help provide stability and integration. So that's where, say, our financial coaching programs come into play, our ESL, and then long-term integration, and the goal is citizenship. So sometimes we will work with refugees for 5+ years and we'll be with them through their whole immigration journey here in the US. And then just a note here on the realities of resettlement. So families who arrive often experience a wave of emotions and something we call the U curve of cultural adjustment. Oftentimes expectations are really high before families arrive to the US. And then the realities of new environment, identity loss, also adjusting to a new community and career changes, and also the realities of how expensive life here in the US, especially within the last few years, is very difficult, especially with the housing prices in major cities such as Los Angeles. But then as families begin to become adjusted and learn public transit or begin to learn a new language, some of these emotions begin to kind of flatten out eventually. But we know that there's always, the sense of missing one's country, missing one's culture, that is to be expected. So now I'll talk a little bit about ways that you can help and ways that you can get involved, because refugee resettlement work is really a public-private partnership. So that means that we really cannot do our work without the support of the community. So of course you can donate financially to support recently arrived refugees, but we more so need help with, or not more so, but equally need help with in-kind donations. So household goods to help refugees as they resettle and adjust in their new homes. We need everything from furniture, so you can donate gently used furniture. We also need household goods, which we have on our Amazon and Target wish lists. We do have a number of items which we require to be purchased new, such as bedding, mattresses, and some household items. But you can shop directly on our wish list, or you can always email me to see if we need items or furniture that you may have. And then also housing. So as I kind of alluded to there, housing has become extremely expensive in Los Angeles, as I'm sure all of you are aware. So finding and securing affordable long-term housing has become one of our greatest challenges to refugee resettlement. We're able to provide initial financial assistance, but that long-term of being able to afford housing here is really become an issue. And so if you were really looking to the community to help provide housing leads, or if you know any property or rental managers who would be willing to rent to a refugee, this is something that's extremely helpful. Refugees, of course, arrive without credit, without rental history, without employment. And so landlords and property managers have become increasingly also particular with who they rent to due to COVID. And so really landlords who are willing to kind of negotiate and rent to refugees despite not having a cosigner possibly or credit is something that would be extremely helpful to helping secure long-term housing for them. And then we also have volunteer and internship opportunities, which you can view on our website. But a majority of our volunteer opportunities are really around helping to provide these in-kind donations or helping to deliver furniture or donations. And then also we do have some volunteer positions with ESL and financial coaching as well. And then lastly here, I have our call to action from the IRC. So the IRC is calling on the Biden administration to act now to provide temporary protected status for Ukrainians who are fleeing the conflict. So this has been done before previously under other administrations, say for El Salvador, refugees who are refugees who are fleeing El Salvador and other instances as well. So this is something the Biden administration could do now to help ensure safety for Ukrainians who are fleeing and could come to the US. So if you are interested, you can email the White House today. I have the link here for our website, which is rescue.org/takeaction. We also have one other call to action right now, which is urgent, which is the Afghan Adjustment Act. And this is for many of the Afghan refugees who came here through the evacuation, were not given refugee status or did not even have SIV status because it was done on such short notice. They were given humanitarian parole, which does not provide a pathway to citizenship or permanent status necessarily. So we're calling on the Biden administration to pass the Afghan Adjustment Act, which would help provide a pathway to permanent status for Afghans who were evacuated. So that concludes my calls to action. And so now I will open it up to questions and Q&A.
Thank you very much, Carly. That was very interesting, to say the least. It's an overwhelming subject at this point. We do have a few questions. So the first one is, it goes without saying that refugees have had traumatic experiences. We're seeing that on the television every day now. What services, programs are available for post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. We know that a significant number of refugees have experienced trauma and or violence. So the IRC in LA, we work with partners and the county to provide refugee health assessments and referrals to medical and mental health resources. There are other IRC offices that do provide more programs specifically geared towards those with PTSD. So as I mentioned, in our Colorado and Arizona offices, I believe we have programs for survivors of torture and human trafficking. But yes, this is something that's very important, and we work with local organizations and the county to help provide more intensive medical and mental health case management.
Okay, thank you. So what types of long-term services are available for refugees, particularly in this local area?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, resettlement agencies are only funded by the government to provide 90 days of case management services. And that is not enough time to help a family adjust to life here in the US. So we really try to have other programs and services that can help them integrate and adjust. So that's ESL classes and financial coaching. This is actually a huge program because we all know how much financial literacy skills help us to really thrive in the US. So everything from learning about credit, how to open a bank account, and the dangers of credit cards and credit, but also how it can help you, because you really need credit to do everything in the US. And so really these programs to help refugees succeed for the long term and really thrive. And then we also have immigration services to help them adjust their status to green card holders, and then eventually citizenship, and then also family reunification. So if they still have family back in their home countries, we also provide family reunification services as well.
Wonderful. Okay, that's a lot of services.
Yeah.
Okay, so now how will the IRC provide for the needs of the large numbers of refugees that are fleeing Ukraine right now?
Yeah, so we are currently on the ground in Poland, and also mobilizing to partner with local civil society or community-based organizations to help provide humanitarian aid and support to refugees fleeing Ukraine or internally displaced. In the US, we have resettled a significant number of Ukrainian refugees over the past few decades, significantly more so since 2014. when the invasion of the eastern regions first began. And there is also a program called the Lautenberg Program, which is for refugees from the former Soviet Union who are facing religious persecution. And through this program, we have also resettled a significant number of Ukrainian refugees. So refugees from Ukraine will go through the normal pathways that I mentioned in this presentation. So they'll still be going through the process of being registered by the UNHCR and then through the refugee admissions program, which is why we are calling on the Biden administration to urgently issue temporary protected status, because the refugee admissions program process can take years. So yeah, once the refugees arrive here, we'll hopefully, as I mentioned, provide all the services that I went through and, be ready to welcome them when they arrive.
Okay. The next question, I think you responded to this already in your presentation, but I'll just ask you, does the IRC have a different policy for handling refugees from Ukraine compared to refugees from other origins, such as Syria, Afghanistan, or Africa?
So the IRC does not have a different policy. We are committed to providing services and aid and resettlement services to refugees, regardless of race, religion, nationality, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender identity. It's unfortunate that we have seen, a lot of coverage in the media that has kind of normalized conflict or refugees from the Middle East or Africa. And but we know that's not the case, and refugees can come from all backgrounds. You can speak to refugees from Afghanistan or Sudan who are doctors, human rights lawyers, journalists, and so yeah, we really work with refugees based on need alone.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you mentioned the numbers, but I didn't hear. How many Afghan refugees have been sent to the LA area? And this is a three-part question that was sent. Have they all been resettled? And how can the League of Women Voters help out? We're also wondering about an influx of Ukrainians. That's a big question.
Yes, that's a definitely multi-part question, but a great question. I don't have exact numbers of how many Afghan refugees have been resettled to Los Angeles between the between the 5 now different resettlement agencies, but it has been a significant number. A majority chose or had family here in California already. So California was one of the top states for refugee resettlement of Afghan refugees. And have they all been resettled? So the last family left the military bases a few weeks ago. But in terms of resettlement, that's a different question, because they have been maybe placed in Los Angeles, but we are still trying to locate permanent housing for them. And so because of the housing crisis, it's become really difficult to secure long-term housing. And this is kind of where we need the community support in helping to identify housing leads. Or if you have an open home, or if you have a home, or you can join Airbnb's open homes program if you would like to provide temporary shelter and support to refugees. And then also with the Ukrainian refugees, as I mentioned, we don't have a timeline at this time, because right now there's no such similar program that we had for Afghanistan, which is, Operations Allies Welcome, which provided that immediate evacuation and resettlement to 90,000 refugees. There is not a similar program in place for Ukrainians, and so they will have to go through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program pathway at this time.
Does the IRC provide legal services like attorneys for the refugees?
Great question. So our immigration team they're all Department of Justice accredited, and they provide immigration services such as namely citizenship, but also the green card applications and adjustment of status. And also sometimes UNT visas and other immigration services as well. But we do not provide asylum representation. So that is something that we partner with local legal aid organizations to provide.
Okay.
Mhm.
And let me see. Our next question was, has there been progress on the backlog of people trying to get the SIV visas from Afghanistan and Iraq?
Yeah, so the SIV program was extremely gutted under the previous administration. And so the process to apply for SIV status basically slowed down to a trickle. And there were individuals waiting over 5 years to receive SIV status. And so when the time of the evacuation happened, of course, there was not enough time to grant everyone SIV status. And so that is why we had the Operation Allies Welcome and the humanitarian parole. So right now, that is why we are advocating for the Afghan Adjustment Act, because they weren't able to receive that SIV status. We are advocating now that they receive status that would help them gain permanent status and a more permanent pathway to citizenship here in the U.S. Because I'm not sure about what the current status of the SIV program is, but for those who are evacuated, we are advocating that since they didn't receive the SIV status, or some of them didn't, that they receive more permanent status here in the US.
Okay. And so that's one of the action items that you shared with us, was to contact the Biden administration and ask for approval of the Afghan Adjustment Act, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct. Yes. Thank you. Right. I know. That's lots of.
Right. And you talked about some of the resettlement agencies. Do you have enough of a list that you could put it in the Q&A, a list of the resettlement agencies?
Yeah, I will send a link to the Office of Refugee Resettlement directory. So there's 9 agencies, but depending on the area, sometimes these agencies will subcontract or partner with other local organizations. So it's actually a list of more than 9 different agencies in terms of names. So I can't list them all, but I can send you the link to the directory.
Okay. And would you put the donation link in the Q&A for us so that we can donate to IRC if we...
Yes, I would be more than happy to as well.
Okay. And let's see. Does the federal government provide any long-term services for refugees? Or do they just fund other programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think the federal government, in terms of providing services, namely provides the services through the resettlement agencies or other community-based programs. But yeah, the services for refugees are mainly through the resettlement agencies and other community-based programs.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for indulging us with our questions and giving us some feel for refugees and what is happening on the front lines. So thank you very much for doing that. And I'm going to now turn over this to Marianne Lutz, who's going to talk about advocacy a little bit more. Thank you very much, Carly.
Thank you so much for having me and for all your great questions and support. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen, and mostly thank you, Carly, for a really spectacular program. I'm going to share my screen and talk to you a little bit about advocacy and what you can do to help to help the refugees and other entities that need support legislatively. As the member of the legislative committee for the Pasadena League of Women Voters, our main goals are to educate and to evaluate current and proposed legislation. We also advocate for this legislation. We advocate for the immigration judges, the courts, and we advocate for protection of the undocumented migrants and immigrants in our area. Today, we have two bills that we'd like to focus with you that we feel are important and need to be advocated for. Both these bills have been approved by the League of Women Voters, California, and they are both state bills. So the first one is AB 1368. It's sponsored by Assemblymember Calderon. And the bill would establish, this is just a bill that really fits well into what we just heard from Carly. This is a bill that would establish an enhanced service program for the asylees. It would give them it would authorize an agency that would help give them the social services we need. I think one of the things that Carly talked about was just how emotional and how difficult it is to live in a new country. And this is a bill that speaks directly to that, to give them the services. And we know that housing is huge, and this would support that as well. So that's the first bill, AB 1368. The second bill is AB 937. 937 is sponsored by Assemblymember Calderon. Both of these bills, by the way, are two-year bills. So they were written last year and they will continue on through this coming year. This bill should be heard very soon in April or shortly thereafter the spring break. It's going to be heard in the Senate. And this bill would prohibit state and local agencies for arresting, confining, detaining people who have been in prison or in police agencies or police jails. This would prohibit the arrest of federal agencies to those local agencies, and it prohibits the state and the local agencies from communicating those. I think we've all heard about people who are undocumented who have been in prison for minor reasons, come out of their jail or in prison and immediately are detained and then deported. And this would help curb that practice. And now we're going to place up on the screen ways that you can actually send and where to send your advocating. Remember, today we are advocating two bills, 1368 and AB 937. And you can contact senators. These are state bills, so the federal contacts are not as important for these bills, but this is the information. And but we're going to give you the state contacts in just a moment. If we can forward the slide. One more. There to our local state that you can send it to. We'll try it one more time. Since we're having, there we go. Can we forward those slides to the next? There we go. These are the local representatives that you would want to contact about both of these bills, AB 1368 and AB 937. There's a list of 3 assembly members that are in the San Gabriel Valley area and 2 state senators that are in the San Gabriel Valley area. And contacting any of those 5 individuals would be very important. I would say particularly since AB 937 will be heard very recently in the Senate, you might want to engage with Senator Portantino and Senator Rubio. And now, while this is on the screen, I'd like to welcome back the president of the League of Women Voters Pasadena area, Martha.
Oh, thank you so much, Marianne and Karen, for facilitating the wonderful program today. And thank you, Marianne, for the information on needed legislation. And I also want to really thank Carly so much for the work that you do, and especially for giving our League members and others an opportunity to take part in the important work of helping refugees resettle. And I know that locally, the Pasadena Jewish Temple does work in this space. So for those of you that want to get engaged, if you want to help, we're going to provide the contact information for donations and volunteer opportunities on our website, and we'll email that to you, and also post the slides that you saw about the bills and those that we want to have action. So if you go to our website, give us a day or so, we're going to go ahead and post that information so you know where to make those contacts. And as I said, we're going to post it there. Those of you who are attended will send you an email with the information so you have an opportunity to act. So now I want to share with all of you some information about upcoming events. We have 2 events in the month of April coming up on April 7th in the morning from 10 to 12, Thursday with the League on redistricting, what's happened with all those redrawn lines, what are the opportunities for us to maybe try to make some kind of a difference with in what's happened to how it's affected the elections and the ballot that people are going to get for the June primary in particular, as that's coming up right away. The next event is April 21st, League at Night. And that's the presentation on what cities are trying to do to eliminate the dependence on fossil fuels to generate power, to keep the lights on for us, because we found out that we have a very short window of opportunity to actually arrest all the damage that's happened to our environment, where it's making it very, very difficult for us to survive. I happened to do a lot of visiting in Arizona and finding out that the temperatures there are so high that it's really getting to be very critical. And we certainly don't want that to happen to our environment here locally. But it's an effort that all these cities have to take into account and really change the timelines during which they think they have time to make a difference. So we do need our electricity. We need our lights on for the way that we live. But there's a better way to handle that. And hopefully we will hear from our speakers. We have 3 different speakers who are going to speak to that. So please be sure to follow us, to go to our website so you can see about those coming events. And then let's remember, I want to remind you that today's program was recorded by Pasadena Media. You'll be able to share with friends and family once the video is available on our YouTube channel. And please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Maybe we're not the hot thing, but you can make us so. So please go ahead and share that way. And I want to thank our Zoom hosts, Catherine Gazzi and Hester Bell. Thank you. Thank you very much for the work that you do to help us put these programs on. And finally, thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again at our next upcoming public information events. And again, stay informed about the League and come to our website, lwv-pa.org. Have a great Thursday. Thank you.